Welcome to the American Reformer Podcast, hosted by Josh Abatoy and Timon Klein. Our mission is to promote a vigorous Christian approach to the cultural challenges of our day, rooted in the rich tradition of Protestant social and political thought.
All right. Hello and welcome back to the American Reformer Podcast. You've got Josh Abatoy, Executive Director here. I am joined by Timon Klein, our Editor-in-Chief. And joining us today, we've got a very special guest back on the show, Scott Yenor, Dr. Scott Yenor. He's a fellow at the Claremont Institute. He's also a professor of political science at Boise State University and an all-around mensch. Scott, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me back on, guys. It's a pleasure.
Well, I think, Scott, we often do this. We ask our guests to introduce themselves and tell the parts of their story that are relevant to the discussion we're going to be having. And we're going to talk about reform initiatives in red states, particularly double-clicking on your experience in higher education reform in Florida. But to set the table, can you walk us through a little bit your history of involvement in higher ed generally, and then also specifically in some of the higher ed reform efforts with the DeSantis administration in Florida?
Yeah. So, well, thanks for that. Yeah, I became a professor in the year 2000 at Boise State. And I did not come into this field of study naive. I kind of knew what I was getting into. I knew it was a very, liberal institution. I kept my head down for many years. And I, always was trying to promote liberal arts and things like that, great books when I was teaching. So as I say, I wasn't naive. But, after about 15 years, and certainly after I raised the Jolly Roger, after I was tenured and fully promoted at Boise State in 2010, I started to do lots of speeches on campus, brought in people to promote the American founding and conservative ideas on the family and things like that. And, I started to get on the edge of getting in trouble at the school. And in 2015, I published some stuff on the trannies, and it led to my first cancellation effort. And I was like, where is this coming from? So I had seen that the university had put together a diversity and inclusion committee. And I started to look at their reports, and I'm like, wow, this is going to be really bad. I mean, institutionalizing all of the things that, I was really worried about when I got into the profession. The elevation of race, gender, and class as the primary lenses through which you view all the disciplines. But this was a new thing. A place like Boise State couldn't practice affirmative action. The school is not that good. It doesn't have real standards to get in, so it's hard to practice affirmative action. And what this diversity requirements was the administration saying that it was going to take on the same lens as the various disciplines had taken on. It was going to view how it evaluated departments and faculty members and how it recruited faculty members through the lens of diversity. And so this looked like, an extension of the realm of conflict that the left had taken on. And at my own university here in Idaho, it was happening. And so this led to me getting involved in informing the state legislature here in Idaho about what was going on this university here and its universities generally. And once I did that, other states asked me to start doing this. So I became kind of accidentally someone who was really involved in diagnosing the problem of what became DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion in campuses around the country, and helping state university systems, state legislatures with diagnosing the problem and coming up with solutions. So I worked on Texas A&M and helped the Board of Regents and the state legislature in Texas with its anti-DEI law in the early 2020s, and helped in Florida when Governor DeSantis was going after DEI in Florida's universities. But I also did reports for the University of North Carolina system that the Board of Regents used to reform it. And we did reports continually here in Idaho to show the ways in which DEI had made advances. And So, and then, in various states, but especially Florida, I've helped a little bit with administering the laws, helping provide comments on rules and ways that they might extend or expand the anti-DEI laws that we have here in the state of Florida. And, I've done that in other states, Wyoming and Idaho and Utah, and just tried to help, people understand the problem of DEI and how it might be uprooted. But I've always been aware of the limits of this approach, because when I got into the business, the problem that I noticed and that all of us really were aware of is what I call the bottom-up problem of the ideology taking over departments and professional standards in disciplines like sociology and anthropology, where the conquest is very complete. But it also was happening in my own discipline of political science. So I was always really worried, and this was the thing that we came in to the profession really worried about, this bottom-up problem, where the university would be controlled by faculty, and faculty would be ideologically homogenous around these race, class, gender, constructs. But what happened really in the 2015-16 and after that, especially after the Floyd episode, is that the top-down policies the policies were coming not from disciplinary standards, but from university administrators. So the anti-DEI movement of the last 5 years or so has really been about trimming back what the administrators do in order to shape and misshape the universities. But we haven't done a lot of touching of the bottom-up problem, the problem of disciplinary corruption from these ideologies. And that's, I think, the next wave of what DEI needs to be concerned about, because it also compromises the university and its mission. So anyways, I've been involved in really trying to think through and implement a vision of what more well-functioning universities would be like. And I've been trying to spread that out, especially in red states, to some effect, I think to some good effect over the last few years.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. So bring us forward to today. Where does that effort stand? And maybe zoom in a little bit on Florida in particular, where perhaps you had your deepest involvement.
Yeah, so Florida is really the model of what red state top-down reform of the universities would look like so far. The big bill that was passed was in 2023, the Senate Bill 266. It was the anti-DEI bill and had lots of components in it. One of them was the defunding of DEI offices, and that was, not the first in the nation, but I think the deepest in the nation at the time. But they also did other things that were really excellent. They went after the general education in Florida's universities and colleges. And they said, look, if your class is infused with identity politics ideology and isn't, foundational knowledge, it has no place in the general ed. And so they went through and culled out lots of classes from the general ed at all of Florida's universities and colleges. It was a Herculean effort. And it led to, getting sociology courses out of the general ed in all the university and colleges. There's been other reforms that can be done top down of the certification process for teachers, elementary and secondary teachers, so that if the School of Education is infused with identity politics and makes that the centerpiece of what it means to prepare teachers, those colleges are not allowed to certify teachers. And I think that's also a very great and salutary reform, but it requires deep dives into what is going on in schools of education at all of the colleges and all of the universities. And Florida is, in the process of doing a great job on that. And I also think that Governor DeSantis has been very self-conscious about selecting people for boards of trustees that are aware of the problems of the top-down problems of DEI and are willing to approach them in a reformist mindset, trying to oversee the universities in a direction. So there's a lot of personnel as policy on this stuff too.
Can I jump in with a question on that real quick, Scott? In Florida, does the president appoint all of the directors, or does he appoint some portion of them with the remainder appointed by some other mechanism?
So Florida has the governor selects the board of trustees,
Okay.
and the board of trustees oversee each individual university. They can be confirmed by the Senate. Mostly it's just kind of been a pro forma thing where the Senate just allows the people that the governor selects to kind of glide into the position. That has changed a little bit in the last year, as we'll talk about later. But and then there's another board, the Board of Governors, that oversees the entire state university system. And then there's a college, equivalent of that, that is in the Department of Education there. So each university is overseen by a board of trustees, and then all the boards of trustees are overseen by a board of governor. But the lion's share of the board of governors are chosen by the governor, but not all of them. And the same is true of the board of trustees. There's a faculty member on each board of trustees, a student member on each board of trustees, and some of the member of board of trustees are appointed by the board of governors. But the board of governors are also selected by the governor. So there's either indirectly or directly appointed by the governor, I guess is the short answer that I could have given you at the beginning, but there's the explanation for it.
But in theory, does the governor have the power of removal?
No, only for cause. Only for cause. Okay. And it's not exactly clear what that means. So people have violated the sunshine laws of Florida as board of trustees members and not been removed for cause. So it must be something more than a mere violation of the law to remove people.
Okay, thank you for entertaining that rabbit trail.
Yes, well, it's actually pretty important to know that stuff because, it raises the question of how much political control does the governor have over the people who are running the universities, and ultimately it means that the governor has lots of power over appointments, but since he doesn't have the removal power. He doesn't have the power to demand actions in line with his agenda.
It's sort of comparable to the NRLB or something.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's yeah.
But not to a cabinet member or to someone who's presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed to a cabinet position because they can be removed. So they end up being instruments of the president. It's not the same for the governor.
I see.
So just to follow up on that, so the governor's influence over this is predominantly expressed through filling the vacancies, and that's the most important.
Filling vacancies and then making laws or supporting laws that then are the overarching purpose or the overarching regulation for what the boards of trustees are. But yes, fulfilling vacancies is the number one thing.
Okay, so this is a decent segue into more practical examples, we might say, Scott, in this, given what you've set up here in terms of, thanks for explaining how this works. I'm sure many of the listeners are unaware of how it actually works. Recently what was in the news regarding you, for those following along at home, was you were nominated, and correct anything I'm saying that's wrong, to the Board of Trustees for a particular university in Florida as part of Governor DeSantis' initiative in this realm.
Yes, I was appointed in early January to the University of West Florida Board of Trustees. It was announced in a National Review article that likened what the governor was doing at the University of West Florida to what he had done at New College. I was nominated along with 6 or 7 other people, and we would constitute a majority now of the Board of Trustees at the University of West Florida, which is in Pensacola. It's a school of about 15,000 and in a conservative part of Florida. And so we had a working majority, and that was the way the governor was exercising his appointment power, was to kind of do some serious reforms at University of West Florida. Now, this is kind of like what happened at New College, which is in Sarasota, a few years earlier, where Chris Rufo, Charles Kessler, and Mark Bauerlein and others were appointed, and they made up a majority of the Board of Trustees at New College, and they gave the university a new mission, fired the DEI officer, fired the president, like within the first month. And so it was kind of sold as a New College type takeover of University of West Florida. And I was then, a few weeks later, selected by the people who were appointed with me as president of the Board of Trustees.
Okay, and before we get into sort of what happened next, I mean, this strategy with, as you're saying, that's being attempted at New College, and then also was proposed for West Florida, is the idea to solve both the problems that you outlined at the beginning, both administratively, but then to address the bottom up sort of faculty issue as well.
Yes, that's the way I imagine it. That these are real tests for what a conservative vision for what the university should look like. And the conservative vision for what a university should look like is not simply get rid of DEI. That's part of it, and it maybe can't be done without that. Like if there's a hostile administration that demands conformity to this particular ideology, it would be really difficult to build a conservative university. But both New College and the promise of University of West Florida was that we would be trying to implement a comprehensive reform that reached into the question of what is actually being delivered, what are we trying to accomplish at this university, and then seeking to, within the confines of the laws and regulations that we have, to implement it. And that was definitely like how I talked to people behind the scenes about what I was going to do on the Board of Trustees.
And you said at the outset, we're sort of back in January here in the story, the 6 or 7 appointments would have constituted a majority. So in theory, be able to implement at West Florida what the new appointees desired according to the governor's direction, and that they would be, in general, amenable to the governor's direction on this.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, totally correct.
Okay. So maybe then the only question is what happened next? You're appointed in January along with several other people. Outline a bit about what this process looks like generally, but also in this particular situation.
Yeah, so generally, you're nominated, you're confirmed by the Senate. You have to go through a couple committees, but then the Senate votes and you're confirmed. And then you begin serving a term of, I'm sorry, I can't remember the number of years. Maybe it's 6 years on the Board of Trustees, but don't hold me to the 6 number. And in my particular case, almost immediately, and not only in my case, but my case and another Board of Trustees member whose name is Adam Kissel, local opposition began to mount to our nominations. There was a group on campus that was established called Students for Socialism and Liberation. I think you may have been a member of this, Timon.
Yeah.
When you were an undergraduate.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
I still pay my dues. Yes.
All right, that makes sense. It's all coming together, and so they started doing like daily marches, and it was kind of a collection of weirdos and freaks. Lots of different hair colors, very strange looking people. It was obvious that they wanted a little bit more than socialism and liberation, I guess. I don't know what more than that would look like. But and their opposition to me, I thought was perfectly normal. The local newspaper and a couple of local blogs started like daily writing stories about things that I've written on feminism and the family and the queer constitution that we have, and Yenor has history of misogynist statements or something like that. You'd see headlines like that every day, but I'm so used to this that these things don't bother me at all. And I've just kind of laughed them off. And but it was also clear that there was lots of local opposition to the very idea of reforming University of West Florida. Some of the donors to the school, certainly the current administration, was a little wary of such efforts, and so they began lobbying members of the Senate who would be in charge of the confirmation process against my nomination, but also, as I say, a couple other members of the Board of Trustees, including a Heritage Foundation guy, Adam Kissel, who's more of a libertarian, a higher ed guy. And so as I say, like lots of opposition. Now, I didn't do anything about this opposition. I kind of was depending on the governor's moral authority to be able to carry the day within the Senate. And so I didn't ever publicly respond to any of the charges that were made against me. This was a little bit difficult for me. One of them, one of the charges that came out was that Yenor may perhaps be an anti-Semite because I had said that it doesn't look to me like the Democrats would elect a Jew as a leader of their national party, given their support for Hamas. And, and then one of the Republican senators picked that up, the headline up, and said, oh, we can't appoint an anti-Semite to the, to the Board of Trustees. And I guess I'd agree. And, but, I didn't like the application in my particular case. And I wasn't, I just had to play the inside game and kind of sit back and take it and not defend myself under those circumstances. These things are hard. And, but the hope was that we could win the inside game and just persuade the people who are real decision makers within the appropriate committees that, I was going to implement a sensible agenda when I was on the Board of Trustees. And
just to get a couple things clear here in this scenario. On the one hand, the local opposition, which is to be expected if they understand what's coming and what's being discussed, but it ultimately doesn't technically doesn't matter, right? There's nothing that the local opposition can do in terms of exercise of real power in the scenario to thwart the governor's appointments themselves, right?
Except they could persuade the senators.
Right. Just through the power of persuasion. But they themselves, the opposition doesn't actually, from the university that's getting a new board of trustees, they can't actually do anything about it themselves. They would just have to persuade others on their behalf.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
And then in the, I totally understand these. I mean, rarely, unless I'm just sleeping on this, do I see these kinds of episodes making, what would eventually be sort of national news, right? In terms of the outlets. Rarely do I don't notice that happening with every scenario. It seems to only be when conservatives are making appointments of this kind. Same with New College, right? It made national headlines because it's conservatives doing it, even though the left has been doing it for decades and no one talks about it. That was all totally fine.
Yeah, the left is becoming aware of how conservative governors are trying to, appoint conservatives to boards of trustees or boards of visitors. This also happened in Virginia, where George Mason's board of visitors were rejected. It would have given conservatives a majority on that particular board, but, the left voted them all down. So they sometimes look for an excuse, but sometimes it's a pure exercise of ideological power. And I don't know which one it was in this case.
Well, I understand in this scenario, if the nominee or the appointee is kind of told or even believes himself, lay low with these criticisms, don't take them head on yet. You've got hearings coming up, but typically you would have, at least from the outside, a sort of defense of the appointee or nominee on their behalf, right? We see this with, just by analogy, Trump's appointees for various cabinet positions several months ago, or I guess around the same time that you were going through this. It's up to sort of aligned media and congressmen to defend the appointees as they're entering the nomination process and the hearings. Right, that's typically the case.
Yeah, and Governor DeSantis did say nice things in my defense. While these criticisms came out, he stood behind me. He said he was going to go. He's going to defend Yenor against the smears that have been lobbied against him by the left. And so, I was happy with him and how he stood behind me, didn't demand my withdrawal or anything like that. And so that was, a heartening moment in the episode for me.
Right. Gotcha. usually then too I mean, you have, maybe some shenanigans are always expected, but usually the aligned Senate or, a congressional body, whichever context we're in, for, presidential appointments, governor appointments, then also provides the legwork and the defense internally in the hearings. Is what you typically see, right? I mean, you can watch the hearings with Pete Hegseth, and the Republicans use their time to just talk about how great he is, and then the left does the opposite, and then you vote on it. So how did this go in your particular case once you're kind of inside the belly of the beast, as it were?
Yeah, so I made a trip to Tallahassee to meet privately with people who would be big decision makers in the state Senate, and had private meetings, which you also see in these cases like you're talking about. I mean, Hegseth will make the rounds and talk to people who are on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and they'll privately be able to have conversations with him and make some decisions about the viability of the candidacy at that point. And I know, like, Hegseth talked to Joni Ernst, who was concerned about his stance on women in combat, and kind of extracted from Hegseth a promise not to touch that, I think. And so I met privately with several senators who were going to be key decision makers, and I met with Don Gates, who is the senator from the area around Pensacola, and he was he seemed to be a very transactional politician. He was interested in how he thought I could lead the University of West Florida, given the overwhelming opposition to my candidacy in the area, which, I thought was a disputed topic, at least. I think if I went to Pensacola and there was a vote on Yenor, I'd win. But there were certain louder people, including the Students for Socialism and Liberation, who I guess won the day. But I don't think they represent the good people of Pensacola. But so Don Gates was worried about that, and I think that's a legitimate thing to be worried about. Of course, it would be impossible to ever really reform an institution under those circumstances, but maybe that shows what he thinks about the need to reform it. And so I met with him. But the other people I met with were state senators who were like on the Appropriations Committee, and they were much more concerned about my statements about feminism, thinking that because I think mothers should be honored, therefore women shouldn't go to college. And because I think that it would be better if fewer people went to college, that I really wouldn't be in a position of public trust to be able to oversee a college. And they hit me with questions like this. My favorite moment in this was sitting down with two kind of older Republican senators who were in charge of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Harrell and Senator Bradley. And one of them, I think it was Senator Bradley, asked me a question, and the question was this. So you're one of those guys, she said, who thinks that men should be providers and women should prioritize homemaking. And given the context, I knew that the answer for her was supposed to be, no, I am not one of those guys. But given the entire body of work and my actual convictions, I said, yes, I think it would be better for America if more men were good providers and more women prioritize the home. And it's not for everyone. I don't think the number needs to be 100%, but it should be 50% or 60% or maybe a little higher. And to which the response was something like, so you're one of those guys who would have chased me out of law school and told me to go home and get in the kitchen. And I'm like, well, I don't think so, but I guess this meeting's over. And it really brought home the idea that it's easy to say something like you're for the family being the cornerstone of society in general, but you're never actually willing to do any of the things that would make the family the cornerstone of society in practice. And this is what an establishment Republicanism is, or Republican is that they talk a good game in general, but it's just boob bait for the bubbas. When it gets down to it, they're not going to do any of the things that are necessary to sustain family life in this particular case, or to defend those people like me who in the public arena do defend the family and talk about what might be necessary to change in order to bring about a stronger family system in the country. So, there was another episode where they brought out my NatCon speech. I gave a speech in 2020 at National Conservatism Conference in Florida, where I talked about how feminism was undermining the country and the family, and I talked about what the prescriptions for making it better would be. It's actually like when I heard all of these quotations, they flooded back to me. I'm like, wow, what a great speech that was.
It's still one of my favorites, that's for sure.
Yeah,
I was there for that one.
Yeah, and so one of the lines that I have in there is that we need to revisit our understanding of private woman, public man, and re-emphasize those old, aspects that we need men to have more public responsibility and women to have more private responsibility, which doesn't mean that they only have private responsibility or men have no private responsibility, but it does mean that the way we're doing it now is kind of unsustainable if we're going to be a people in 100 years. And this was greatly offensive to this particular senator, Katya, I think is her name. She's from Miami. She had 3 interns who were sitting around a table kind of glaring as I'm talking about what this means. Each of them introduced themselves, as an intern or as someone who's interested in going to law school or as someone who's just getting out of law school and really admires this particular senator. And it just became clear that these were hardcore, committed, and pretty radical feminists. But they're within the Republican Party, and they have power within the Republican Party. And of course, anyone who opposes their agenda will ultimately be find enemies in them. And so I also realized I was running into this. So these are the people who had power over my appointments. So it became pretty clear that that my appointment wasn't going to go forward. As I told someone in the governor's office afterward, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being Senator Rubio in front of the Senate this year, 10 being Bob Bork being interrogated by Ted Kennedy, I just got through an 8 meeting with these senators. So it became clear that I was not going to get through hearings. So the decision was made shortly thereafter that I would, at a strategic moment, resign from the Board of Trustees.
Yeah, just to highlight exactly what you said. The assessment, very credible assessment in this case of your experiences, that the same ideologies that we conservatives supposedly want to root out or at least temper in our university systems that are being churning out the members of the socialist and liberation parties on campus are the same ones that have captivated at least a meaningful portion of our own so-called establishment Republicans that have control over whether or not the reform of higher ed will actually happen.
Yeah. So they don't want reform of higher ed because higher ed is the citadel of the rule that they would like to see in the country. And so there ultimately is not as big of a constituency within the Republican Party for higher ed reform because there is so much commitment to the dream that higher education is the road to the independent woman and the social tolerance and the agnosticism that defines the ruling class.
Yeah, Scott, what's your do you think that the values of these Republican senators are idiosyncratic? Is this sort of a lagging indicator of a bygone time where we produced elites who had these sets of commitments? Or on the other hand, do you think that they're actually organically responding to the constituencies that they represent? In other words, where are these opinions and commitments coming from?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because I think the next candidate, Adam Kissel, kind of helps us answer that question. He's a little bit of a canary in the coal mine on this. He's a libertarian guy. He's great. He's a friend, a real ally in higher education reform, but doesn't have any culture war background like I do. And so he actually went through a hearing and was voted down by the Senate. including the most important, I believe, were Bradley and Gates, two of the people that I talked to. And there was no like feminism or anything like that on the agenda for him. It was simply that he questioned, in some of his other writings, the viability for public funding of universities with drastically collapsing enrollment. And he said, maybe we should give them a one-time payoff and privatize those universities. And there was just a pretext for voting him down because he said that, and he did not survive the committee. He was voted down in committee. And so that leads you to think, or at least me to think, that part of what these senators are about is protecting local prerogatives of senators to really influence who's supposed to be on the Board of Trustees. So the Board of Trustees would not be governing positions, but rather kind of rewards for friends. And these universities would then be allowed to kind of glide into on the path that they're on. They just keep gliding. And so, I do think that it's a very complex mix of motivations. It's also true that many people in the Senate simply wanted the governor to lose some votes. They were resisting his efforts to get the state involved in immigration reform. They were trying to undermine some of his previous higher ed reforms, and sinking some of his candidates for the Board of Trustees was also, I think, part of an overall backlash against the governor's power and agenda among swampy Republicans within Tallahassee. And then I do think that lots of these things are pretexts to vote people down in the name of patronage politics or this kind of backlash that was going on.
Yeah, and I suppose as an outsider observing this situation from a distance, it did seem to me that to some degree, this reform effort was a casualty of this increased hostility from some of the senators against DeSantis, Republican senators who, perhaps, have been, frankly, in the early years of his administration, he really got his way with the legislative bodies in Florida. And it seems like in the last couple of years, the legislature has increasingly tried to stretch its legs and gain some autonomy. And I chalked a fair bit of this up to that, at least as an outsider looking in.
Yeah, I do think that, there is not a deep commitment among Republican legislators around the country to genuine higher ed reform. I do think that's also the truth about the matter. They don't understand what it would take. And it's actually a pretty complex issue. And so without that commitment and without really trying to understand the depth of what it would take, because it would require a real imagination to figure out what a conservative university would be, they'd rather just say, let's get rid of DEI and call it a day. And so I do think that that's a real long-term problem for the efforts in higher education, is building an understanding for what higher ed reform would mean and what it would take.
Let's zoom the camera out a little bit then, Timon, unless you had any other particular questions on that.
No, I think go ahead. I was just going to, I think this is a good segue into explaining what it looks like more broadly then, because we've identified maybe it's a problem that's outside, that goes beyond the Senate of Florida, right, is the point. So
yeah, I'll phrase it this way, Scott. I think a lot of our listeners and nationally, I think people are looking at Florida and they're saying, wow, if Governor Ron DeSantis, who's been a political darling in a lot of ways, a leading governor by example in that state, if he can't, if he's going to be taking L's on this front from his own party in Florida, what are the prospects for higher education nationally? And in my state, where my governor is, fine, but he's no Ron DeSantis, is that, I think that conservatives are probably to some degree demoralized by some of what you're saying here. And so can you give us reason for hope?
Oh, I don't specialize in hope, Josh. Did you have me on to do hope?
Yeah, we were told you're a hope and change guy.
Yeah, so here's the bright side. Like, no one has tried to do anything before Governor DeSantis, and he has been a model for what to do, how to begin this whole thing. And I think that if all of the laws that have been passed now in Florida are fully implemented, this would register as like a 2 on the Richter scale, which is like more than any other place. And not only that, but there are real committed people in the administration, the DeSantis administration, who are actually trying to get this done. They're all over. They're very competent people. They're ambitious. They recognize what's at stake, and they're really going after the whole top-down apparatus. But the issue is that once you have the top-down DEI apparatus removed from your university, now what? And this is a very complex issue. And the things that I would like to emphasize after, I've written an article called "After the DEI Bans." Like, what are you going to do afterward? And well, one of them is program reviews. You review the programs for their consistency with the university's mission, and get rid of programs that are thoroughly ideological when you're trying not to have disciplines that are thoroughly left-wing and ideological. So we're going to have to, just like we got rid of the DEI offices, we're going to have to get rid of DEI disciplines, but within the normal processes of identifying programs that are inconsistent with the mission of universities. So I think there's lots of departments, lots of majors, lots of programs on campus that would fail these tests. But there's going to be lots of shrieking. It's going to be nothing compared to the shrieking that happened when I was nominated UWF, because no one knew what we were going to be about. It's also about building certain things. What should the modern university be about? And here I would emphasize that we need to have genuine professional education, like medical schools and law schools and, I guess preparing accountants and things like that. And we should have workforce education where we're getting people ready for jobs in tech and cybersecurity. And we should be promoting a history and appreciation of our civilization. And if your department and your program is not contributing to those 3 things, it has to find a way of justifying its existence on the campuses. So we need to have a positive vision, which is workforce, professional, and Western Civ on our universities. But that requires, I think, cutting lots of things on universities. So this, I think, I would say different things about Christian universities and what their goals should be. Because obviously, or maybe I would say included in that in the professional education with the preparation of pastors and people for pre-sem and things like that. We'd want to talk in different ways about different universities, but going forward with a positive vision for what we're trying to accomplish is going to be extremely disruptive. Every time a conservative anywhere tries to reform a public institution, the left shrieks and says it's an attack on democracy. It happens when Bibi Netanyahu wanted to reform the Israeli Supreme Court. It happens when conservatives win majorities on school boards. It happens when conservative superintendents are hired in a particular school district. People quit or they threaten to quit, and suddenly there's chaos. Well, that's what happened when I was appointed to the Board of Trustees. And that's what will happen. That's what happened at New College when the Board of Trustees was placed there in 2023. And of course, the faculty and the media have not stopped attacking New College and the institutional takeover and talking about how chaotic it is. So we have to get used to it, and we have to almost inure ourselves to these kinds of claims because they are sewn into what's going to happen when you do conservative reform.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's a good word on that. The question I had when you were at the beginning of talking about, what comes after DEI, to your mind, why is it at this stage that it's become acceptable or expected for conservatives to get rid of DEI? Like that first step is kind of accepted and needs to happen, even if it hasn't been implemented everywhere. But these latter steps have not yet been seen as part and parcel of that, or as a completion of that, as necessary to true reform. Is it because of the lack of positive vision? Is it something particular about DEI, getting rid of DEI being palatable, or has that just been popularized enough to where people have accepted that stage, but not so with the latter? Yeah, do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think the problem is that conservatives have bought into the idea that the university is a marketplace of ideas. And if you get rid of the DEI apparatus, it will once again be a marketplace of ideas. Well, that's just objectively false as an empirical question about what would happen on the university if you got rid of DEI. It is not a marketplace of ideas, but it is also false on the level of vision, because universities are about something. They're about actually trying to accomplish goals. The left knows this, but conservatives respond by saying, oh, the university shouldn't have a purpose. No, like, dude, you have to have your own purpose and try to pursue that with the institutions that you build. So I do think that conservatives have been a victim of the kind of conservative Inc. approach to higher education reform, which is limiting yourself to banning affirmative action or racial preferences, securing free speech, and that's what you need to do. That's not enough. It's not anywhere close to enough. It doesn't have a vision, and it doesn't take account of the realities on the ground.
To your mind, I mean, we've talked a little bit about New College. I mean, it seems to me that this is, as you're saying, certainly difficult to do, not just to sell it to other conservatives, but to actually in real time construct what that vision is going to be for even a particular institution. I mean, is this just groundwork that hasn't been done and should have been done even before you started attacking the DEI program, so that you had the next step ready to kind of go and roll out? Or is this just kind of the nature of the beast and these are necessary growing pains?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a great knower of everything that's going on at New College. I read something yesterday by a person who was there for a year, Bruce Gilley, who's a conservative at Portland State, has written in defense of colonialism, or at least to try to show the bright side of colonialism, I guess. And is a good guy. I think his stuff is excellent on that topic and most other things that he writes. And his, this is my short summary of what the article was. It was on the Martin Center blog. He basically argued, look, I mean, we've hired a lot of people who are in line with the new vision of a classical education at New College, maybe a quarter of the faculty. That's a lot. But that means there's 3/4 that are not aligned. And there's nothing is done about them. And it's very difficult to imagine how this is going to work in the long term unless it's more thoroughly the house is more thoroughly cleaned out. And this is a small college that is nothing like University of Florida or Texas A&M. Its influence isn't that wide. And we only have a third of a victory here, though we have a great president and a board that supports him, and we're still unable to carry the football all the way down the field and score the touchdown. And so that's a very interesting and I think sobering account of what's going on at one of the places that's a premier, example of conservative reform in higher ed.
Yeah, as Machiavelli says, do all the violence at once and at the beginning. So to be more thorough. Yes, this is
which would have meant not only firing the president and not only getting rid of DEI and gender studies, which was done in the first few months of that takeover, but it would mean imposing a new curriculum and identifying the faculty who are not able to participate in delivering that new equipment and getting rid of them through program review.
Yeah.
and that would be doing it at a stroke, to quote the great Machiavelli.
Yes.
But death by 1,000 cuts usually means the person who's giving the cuts dies.
Yes. Well, I think, that's a great roundup and sort of review of what's going, what needs to be happening and how this vision needs to be solidified, and the people implementing it prepared to actually implement it in a meaningful way. But sticking in Florida with, recent news also is kind of what's going on at the University of Florida. So again, over in Gainesville. And this also recently made news with the presidential search over there. So bring us up to speed a bit and comment on what's gone on over there as well.
Yeah, the very short story is that the University of Florida is doing a presidential search, and it named as sole finalist, I think May 3rd or 4th, the University of Michigan president, whose name is Santa Ono, a very strange name. Good for him, though. And so he was selected, and then it just came out like weeks of videos and articles about his radical history at the University of British Columbia and University of Michigan, all the crazy ways in which he adopted not only DEI policies, but climate policies, as COVID lockdown policies everywhere. And this stuff trickled out. Now, he was then unanimously approved by the University of Florida Board of Trustees, the people who oversee just that university. And they asked him basically, will you right now agree that everything your career has stood for is no longer important to you? And he's like, absolutely, it's no longer important. I've changed my mind. Those were divisive positions. And so he was unanimously passed. And then he goes to the Board of Governors, the people who are directly appointed by the governor. And on Tuesday of this week, the Board of Governors, in an unprecedented move, voted the sole finalist for the University of Florida presidential job down by a 10-6 vote. And the hearing, guys, it was like a conservative dream, because really intelligent people on the boards of governors were asking very difficult questions of this committed leftist who couldn't evade them. And they were so effective, smart, prepared to ask these questions that, it's almost to the point where you feel sorry for the guy who's having to answer the questions. You keep telling me you're a scientist. Well, as a scientist, will you tell me what evidence persuaded you that America was systemically racist? And he'd be like, well, I'm not really an expert at that, but a committee on campus told me that it was, so I acted in line with that view. And it was an entire 4-hour hearing of him retreating or saying things like that. Well, I'm not really an expert. I'm not really an expert. They even asked him, this guy, Santa Ono, he's an immunologist. And guys on the Board of Governors asked him, why did you require all Michigan students to get the third COVID booster in 2023? And Ono said, well, I'm not really an expert in vaccines. And the guy who's on the Board of Governors, Carson Good was his name, said, well, you're an immunologist. And but then Santa Ono responded, well, I only study mice. It's so ridiculous. And the guy was humiliated. He showed himself to be dishonorable and lacking integrity. And how can a person be a leader of a university, especially one who's trying to take it from just banning DEI to deepening and extending the sphere of reform? How can he be trusted with an institution like the University of Florida? And the Board of Governors, recognizing this problem, voted him down. Now, this, I would say, was a real Hail Mary. It was never happened before that people have been voted down to the Board of Governors like this. And of course, a Hail Mary is not an argument for a strategy built around Hail Marys.
Yes.
But you usually don't win if you're throwing the Hail Mary. But in this particular case, it worked. And there's lots of lessons in here, I think. But One of them is that it's very normal for boards of trustees to be captive of the local interests and the school administration, the school faculty. I mean, that's what University of West Florida wants. University of West Florida wants a board of trustees that's captured by the administration and the faculty and like the local donors. And that's what the University of Florida has. And this guy, Santa Ono, is unanimously approved, as I say, by the board of trustees. So it was a huge victory to vote him down. But then you have to ask the question, like, well, how are you going to get a new president? And is the new president going to be better than this guy? And so the same process is going to be followed. The board of trustees is going to oversee it. It's the same people on the board of trustees. We'll see if they can have learned any lessons from this particular episode.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it doesn't sound like a strategy for ultimate victory at all, but at least it demonstrates that the Board of Governors is willing to be active and exert oversight in some regard. I mean, maybe this guy was just so unpalatable that he couldn't get through, but it doesn't really answer the question of where's the actual threshold and is it where we'd want it to be?
Yeah, and the thing that this is the thing that boards of trustees are bewitched by credentials. And this is just another part of, you have to get used to the left kind of screaming when you reform an institution. Another part of it is the people you're going to identify to lead an institution, like these are the criteria. They should be aligned, they should be competent, and they should be ambitious. But demanding equivalent experience, you're just going to get the same creatures that are corrupting higher education around the country.
Right.
So you have to kind of get beyond the idea that you demand administrative experience at equivalent institutions.
Yeah.
Like you're looking for aligned, competent, and ambitious people. And that's that's a real tough thing to to get people to get over. Like you don't want people who are from University of Michigan, actually.
Yeah.
Trying to lead these places.
Right. Because, I mean, in theory, there could be people who have really played the game. They were laying low, but they're totally aligned and totally ambitious in terms of the outlining, implementing reform. But in general, it should be assumed that someone that's coming out of success in this way, like this Ono guy had from a major research university, is probably not your guy.
Yeah, I think that's the default position. You're guilty till proven innocent. And
Yes.
what it takes to prove you innocent is more than just saying, oops,
Right.
never mind my entire public record.
Right.
Like, I want skin in the game. Like, you have to have come out against DEI and lost a job. Then I might consider you. You have to have come out and lost a friend.
Yeah.
And then I might consider you. But not like, oh, now that you're going to triple my salary, I've decided I don't like DEI.
Right.
I mean, we know what he is. It's just about what price he is going to charge.
Right. Right. Which, especially from the position of the governor's reforms, of higher ed in Florida, not only do you want to, you certainly don't want a guy that is adamantly anti-aligned, but then almost just as worse is this sort of, limp-wristed guy coming in that will do whatever suits his bottom line, right? So maybe that's the explanation for why he had these stupid views in the past. But it's almost worse than him actually believing them is the fact that he's willing to give them up so quickly for his own personal gain.
Yeah, it's always been a question. I don't know how you've probably thought about this too, but like, are the people who are on top of these universities, are they fanatics or are they opportunists?
Yeah,
and there are no doubt some fanatics, like Claudine Gay was probably a fanatic. But, the Ono episode shows that opportunism runs deep.
Yeah.
And the question of how you judge opportunists now becomes an important thing as there's been a certain kind of vibe shift. And I would suggest the skin in the game standard has to be the standard. Not just like I renounce everything, the devil in all his ways, but and the devil has stung me in several ways.
Yeah, I lean also towards, I just think so little of them, towards the opportunist as being the predominant category to put these people in. I would even Claudine Gay, in my opinion, because a real activist, true believer wouldn't have, plagiarized all her activist papers. She would have actually written them. So she herself may just be an opportunist. Couldn't even be bothered to do the work.
You're shedding me of the last threads of idealism I had, Timon, by saying that.
Yes, I think so little of these people. In any case, well, Scott, we're coming up on time here. You've already been more generous with it than we asked for. So, any sort of parting thoughts? Any loose ends here you want to touch on before we let you go? We appreciate you coming on and talk to us about this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say one thing, and then we can go. Maybe we can talk about this again some other time. But the thing that I think conservatives, insofar as there's a new right, that the new right should be concerned about what the purposes of these institutions are, and try to act within light of those. Let's not make procedural arguments. Let's not get hung up on those as the ultimate goals. Like, we need to think about what we're trying to accomplish with these institutions. And higher ed is a classic example. Especially Christian colleges, they should be thinking about what their end product is, and then design those institutions around those, or imagine those institutions around those end products, and then take incremental steps to get there. But, not being bewitched by free speech and banning affirmative action, which I'm for both those things, I guess, but they're not ultimate values. And so that's really, I think, the new angle that conservatives need to focus on much more than we have in the past.
Yeah. I agree with that. I mean, I think there's sort of two problems. This is across all the new right, not just even in higher ed reform. There's two sort of issues, which is on the one hand, with the vibe shift, as you referenced, and certain victories that we weren't sure we were going to get just several months ago. There is an opportunity to try to take over, capture, reform, however you want to put it, institutions, and you need people that know how to do that on the ground. And there's a sort of lack of that particular skill available to us right now, and that kind of not experience on paper like you were talking about earlier, but experience in doing this sort of thing, skin in the game in this way. At the same time, it's not clear to me that, prior to some of our more recent victories, it was a period of incubation and sort of ideological development for ourselves of what we're doing. It's not clear to me that even that fully took hold, and that people really have thought about long enough what any of our institutions should look like. And so we're somewhat, in my opinion, lacking in talent on both fronts.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Well, Scott, thank you again so much for shedding light on this stuff, and especially the particular episodes you just were involved in. I think they'll be instructive to people and illuminating in terms of how deep the problems go in this realm. Because it's, reform in higher ed at a sort of popular surface level probably is considered by many people to be a place we're gaining ground, and that may not be the case in the way that many people assume. So thank you for talking to us about this. We won't say black pilling us, but maybe red pilling us on some of this, and I think that's extremely useful.
All right, well, thanks for having me on, Timon.
Yep, and to you listeners, thank you for joining us. And as always, subscribe to the podcast and all that, website and so on. And until next time, God bless.
You can find American Reformer on the internet at www.americanreformer.org or on x.com, formerly Twitter, at @AMReformer. Don't forget to like, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Please consider supporting us today by making a tax-deductible donation through our secure online donation portal at americanreformer.org. That's americanreformer.org.